All right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of David's Saturday Night Sit Back. Tonight, I have Jeff Hanson sitting back with me. He is a local business owner here in Austin, Texas, owner of Austin Sliding Door and Windows Repair. And Jeff, what you might not know about him, at least not on the surface, is that he is a 44-year-old recovered alcoholic and drug addict with a sobriety date of September 20th, 2017. Congratulations on that, by the
Thank
way.
you.
He's also, though, a father, a husband, and an all-around regular great guy that has overcome obstacles and wants to help other people do the same. About 6, 7-ish years ago, his life has spiraled out of control by poor choices he had made. But it's completely different now. You're living a life that you never thought was possible. You have a beautiful family, a partner that you're in love with, lots of good things going for you. So, Jeff, I'm really excited to have you on the show today to talk about your story and just see, what maybe the audience can learn through your own experiences and maybe avoid some of those obstacles that they might be heading to themselves. But in short, welcome to your episode of David's Saturday Night Sit Back.
Well, thank you, David. I'm honored to be here and thankful to be part of your podcast. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for reaching out. So you're actually the first person, I think, that reached out to me and asked to be on the show, but then also followed through. You wouldn't believe how many people hit me up and say, "Hey, can I be on the show?" And I'll message them back and they'll never hear back from them again. Or maybe we have our intro phone call and then they never schedule. And it's always like, "What happened? Did I scare them off?" Or who knows? But you pulled through, you followed through. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yes, absolutely.
So, one thing that you put on the form that you filled out, that's an interest for you to talk about, and it was so specific. I had to ask you why you put this down.
Sure.
Mexican food.
Mexican food? Well, it's the best food you can eat, in my opinion. It's not the healthiest, but that's my favorite type of cuisine. Growing up in Southern California, that's just, it's everywhere. There's some good Mexican food here in Austin. It's I try not to eat it as much now just because right now I'm in a cut, I'm cutting weight.
Yep.
So I've had to, kind of limit some certain foods that are high fat but other than that, yeah, like if you ask me what my last meal would be, or if like one meal that I could eat every day for the rest of my life, it would be Mexican food.
Hell yeah. Where's the best place to go if you're going to eat out in Austin, and specifically Mexican food?
So I like Fonda San Miguel, which is like in central Austin.
Okay.
It's kind of more of like a formal sit-down place, but it's pretty legit. They make their own tortillas. It's kind of like a cross between Tex-Mex and like what they call interior Mexican food here. It's like not like full-on Tex-Mex, some of the Tex-Mex stuff I like, but this Fonda San Miguel is probably the most legit spot I've been to.
Okay, I'm going to get some friends together and go.
You should.
I'm sure they've been, but I'm still figuring out where I like to eat out on the days I eat out. I just had Chewy's for the first time. Is it
Oh
Chewy's?
yeah, Chewy's. Yep.
Yeah,
That's a popular spot.
it was good.
Yep.
It was fine. It wasn't necessarily somewhere I'd go every day.
Sure.
But it was very satisfying. I was happy when I left. My belly was content.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chewy's is that's like a Austin staple. Like pretty much any local you ask, like where should I try Tex-Mex? That's going to be the answer is Chewy's.
Yeah. You before we got on mic, we were talking a little bit about how you were living in San Diego at one point. What specifically brought you and your family out to Austin, and what year was it? Do you recall?
So we actually came out here for the first time in 2017. My mother and father-in-law used to live here in the late 70s. My father-in-law was a professor at UT.
Okay.
And, we were living in Southern California, and the cost of living there is extremely high, and was looking to expand my business into another state. And I kind of looked around in Phoenix and Scottsdale area, and there was already a lot of kind of the same type of business there. And my father-in-law said, well, why don't you go check out Austin? So, we came out for a visit. We went to ACL, had a blast, and just, really liked the downtown and just kind of the whole scene. So we ended up coming back for a second visit, and on that second visit, we put a deposit down on a house. And
Heck yeah.
Yeah, and then it's been history ever since. So
There you go. So at the time, I'm trying to remember your timeline on your Instagram. Did you have both your kids in 2017, or just Knox is your son, correct?
So yeah, I have two kids. They were both born in San Diego.
Okay.
They're 8 and 11, and so they moved. They were real young when we moved here, so they've pretty much grown up here. They first few years of life was in San Diego, but they've lived here longer than they did there now. So
There you go. There
Yeah.
you go. All right, we're going to have an accountability moment, if that's okay. I
Sure.
know we haven't known each other that long, but one of your New Year's resolutions that you talked about on Instagram was to spend more quality time with your family, putting the phone away a little bit more. How did that go? Are we going strong with that still?
Yeah, I am, and it's something so I first started with restaurants, right? So I used to, with doing most of my business on the phone, we'd go to a restaurant to just have a meal together, and my wife would tell me like, hey, can you put the phone down? I didn't even realize I was doing it. So once I eliminated the restaurant, then I started noticing I was looking around and noticed other families where everybody had their phone out and nobody was interacting. And we were on a vacation in Florida, and we actually had this, older couple come up to us, and they said, I got to tell you, we were observing you, and we're really, just want to commend you for not having your phones and having your kids on devices. Because they said even our grandkids, they can't go out to dinner without looking at a phone or being entertained in that fashion. So after that, I just, I realized like, I got to just try and cut the phone out even at home.
Yeah.
And so I put it on my desk in my office when I get home, and I stay off of it.
Yeah, that's for me. I love staying off my phone specifically when we're podcasting. One, just out of I feel like I owe you my attention. You took your time to drive here today and to talk with me and to be on the show, so you deserve 100% of my attention. I feel like it's part of it, but also it's sort of like just a really nice break. Like
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
it feels good to be able to say like, yeah, I haven't looked at that thing in 3 hours, and it was sort of like I don't know, mentally, like I think partly after podcasting too, I just feel better because it's so much fun. I get to listen to your story. I'm often quite motivated by the person sitting across from me. So there's some other factors as well, but I think by completely ignoring that thing, unless we have to do a fact check on something, it feels pretty darn good.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
totally agree. I mean, it's nice just to, check out for a little bit. And I grew up in the 90s, like in high school, and that was kind of like right in the transition when people were starting to get phones. And so, like, I'm definitely not like what they call a digital native. I'd be like the digital immigrant, I think is the term. So it's not really like, I'm used to it now, but it's like I remember a time when, like, there was no cell phone. It was like if you went out with your friends, like, there was no calling anybody. It was like you had to make plans and meet up. And I think it definitely adds to the stress level for people that are just tied to it, and I totally get it, being a business owner, it's like hard to check out, but yeah, I think it's not a bad thing to just turn it off. So,
Yeah. Yeah, it's that comment you made about, growing up in the 90s, same thing. Like I had my friend Danny was one house across the street over, and then Annie was in this house and James was in that house, and whenever we wanted to play basketball or laser tag or hide and seek, the activities changed as we aged and got older. But yeah, we would just go over to each other's house and knock on the door.
yeah,
Isn't that madness?
I don't
That's
know.
what and the parents would get it normally, or maybe one of the our friends would come answer it. But yeah, that's how we did it growing up when we wanted to hang out, was run across the street, knock on the door, and see what they were up to.
Yeah, absolutely. Or if someone's bike was out front, you knew they were there, right?
Yep. Yeah. Cool, man. What was the original question? Oh yeah, staying off your phone. Yeah. But yes, if you in the audience have not tried it, I would try it out sometime. If you know that nothing important is going to be coming in that's like work related or something, put your phone in another room, even if it's for like 30 minutes or an hour, and then see how you feel afterwards. See if you actually missed anything. More than likely, you probably didn't. I actually like, though, your example of doing it when eating. Maybe that would be a good time to test this out. Get the phone completely away from you when you're eating. Don't have it even in your pocket or like on your lap. Like, just put it in the other room and enjoy the meal.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, let's get started here on why you're here. I have a picture I pulled off your Instagram for you, and I want to know if you will tell me exactly what goes through your head when you see this. Obviously, not the highest quality
Yeah.
picture, but I figured you'll know what this moment is. And for those who are watching on YouTube, I'll put it up on there. So as Jeff is sort of reflecting on this, if you want to go see the image, you can as well. But what sort of goes through your head when you see that version of Jeff?
Well, that was a couple days before I totally surrendered, meaning like I decided that I had to stop doing what I was doing, or I was going to die. I mean, I was truly convinced that that was going to be the outcome. Um, I think I weighed about 190 pounds there. I wasn't eating, I wasn't sleeping. I was fully addicted to cocaine, fentanyl. I was drinking alcohol, like 10 to 12 IPAs a day.
Hmm.
And just, I was starting to, the lack of sleep really started to just take a toll on me mentally.
Yeah.
And that was a camping trip that I tried to go on that just turned out to kind of be a disaster. And I knew that the outcome of what I was doing wasn't good. And I mean, it just, when I see that picture, yeah, it brings back a lot of memories. I mean, I'm grateful that I'm not in that place now,
Yeah.
but it definitely, it brings back a lot. It's a little bit haunting.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I'm assuming at the time you weren't, were you exercising on a regular basis?
No, no, I had stopped all that. Like, I was training jujitsu a little bit when I had first started drinking and was just smoking weed. Because I had sobriety once before, back in 2008. I had was kind of like I'd been addicted to OxyContin in the middle of that like OxyContin epidemic that was going on throughout the country. There's a bunch of movies and like documentaries on it now. So I got clean and sober for 5 years, and I ended up deciding to drink again, just to give it another shot. And the drinking, and smoking weed eventually led back to the harder drugs. And when I was drinking and smoking weed, I was still training, going to the gym a little bit and doing jujitsu. And then as soon as the hard drugs came into play, it just, I've heard of like some people being able to do sports like that, but just for me, it's like that was like the main focus, was just getting loaded every day, and all the other things that health. I mean, I'd still drink protein shakes in the
Right.
morning, but that was about the healthiest thing I was probably doing at the time.
A little extra protein spike.
Yeah.
Yeah. So take us back to however far we need to go. What do we need to know about, before Jeff, before the days of the OxyContin and the alcohol and the weed and any other drugs that were mixed in there? What do we need to know about your past?
Like from like when I was a kid, or how far back?
Could be anything. Yeah, it
Okay.
could have been as a kid and maybe your first time exposure to alcohol. Could be maybe even some, if you felt like there's any trauma from your childhood that maybe that led into, what had you afraid that you felt like you needed to numb that fear. Any point of context that you think would be relevant or interesting for the listener to know.
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, I grew up in Southern California, and I lived out in the Coachella Valley area. I mean, I was born in San Diego, and then my dad moved us out to the Coachella Valley, which is like Palm Springs, Palm Desert, Indio, where they have the Coachella Fest. And that town's grown a lot since then, but back then there just wasn't a whole lot to do as a kid. They had these desert parties, which would be, generators and bands, and there's a big music scene out there. So I started, off as like in middle school, I tried weed, and then eventually I started going to parties in high school and drinking, and, just social drinking and going to these big parties out in the middle of the desert. And eventually, turned into more like experimenting with hard drugs, with like hallucinogenics and cocaine, and just I kind of was just a partier for a long time. I was like a social drinker, but kind of a weekend. I do drugs on the weekend, but I could usually maintain a pretty normal lifestyle. I mean, I had a good family growing up. It wasn't like anything specific trauma related. I mean, probably no different than issues than most people have in their family. But I didn't have like, an abusive alcoholic father or anything like that. I mean, I know a lot of people that grow up that way usually end up with these sorts of problems, but that wasn't really the case. It was just more of I was a kind of a shy kid, always felt insecure. I was overweight, and just never really felt like I fit in. So when I started with the party crowd, it was kind of like I found my people, and they accepted me for who I was, and and I really liked music and skateboarding, and in the '90s, I got into like the punk rock scene, and that was kind of my, who I fit in with at that time. So, but all that just, that party lifestyle just kept, maintained it into my early 20s, mid 20s. And eventually I ended up, in a relationship with a girl who did pills, like, kind of recreationally, like Vicodin and Percocets and stuff. And we would go out to the bar and drink. And I finally, my back was hurting from work one day, and she said, "Oh, like I have these pills," and I'd always heard that pills were bad news, and I just said, "Well, I'll just try one," and then, before I knew it, I was fully addicted to OxyContins, and was also using cocaine, and so that was the first time I decided, to get sober, and I actually went to treatment. I had a friend whose mother worked at a treatment facility, and I went to the Betty Ford Center out in Palm Springs, and I got sober there, and stayed living out in Palm Springs for a couple years after I got sober, because I had actually been living in San Diego when all this happened.
Yeah.
So I kind of went from grew up in Palm Desert, moved to San Diego, went back to Palm Desert to get sober, and then back to San Diego.
There is a couple thoughts when it was going through my head while you were talking. One is that when it comes to pills, I take a an ibuprofen every now and then if I pulled something in the gym or whatnot. But I've always just avoided taking any kind of medications. And I went to a music festival last year, and the next morning when I woke up, I jumped out of bed. I just had this really weird pain in like the base of my foot. Not like a cut, or anything like that. It was internal, and I didn't think much of it. And that pain stayed there for about 4 or 5, 6 months. And then one day I'm working out with a buddy who I went to the music festival with. And I said, dude, my foot still hurts at the festival. And he said, David, that's 4 months ago. Like, have you gotten it x-rayed yet? And I said, no. And he said, you probably just broke it. And so go get it x-rayed. They'll give you a boot. You'll wear the boot for 30 days, and then you'll be, right as rain afterwards. So I go in, I get x-rayed, and they say, we actually have worse news potentially for you. It's not a broken bone. You have plantar fasciitis in your right foot. And so we're going to prescribe you this pill, take it for 30 days. And if it helps the pain go away, come back in a month and we'll prescribe you another, another one. And as I'm driving home, I'm thinking, is this the solution to just, pop one of these bad boys a day for the rest of my life? So I decided to get a second opinion. And so I found like a foot specialist of some sort. And I go to see this guy. And he says the same thing. You have plantar fasciitis. What I want you to do is stretch 3 times a day for 3 minutes per occurrence. In the morning, do it in the midday, do it at night. And go stretch for 9 minutes a day. And if nothing has changed, come back in 30 days and reevaluate then. Pain's gone. And I just think it's so funny that you have Dr. 1 who the route was, that's just numb it for the rest of your life. And then you have this very much more appreciated and proactive doctor number 2 who says, do you ever stretch? No. And he's like, you're the classic dude who, goes to the gym all the time and does your calves, but you never do any stretching. You're only doing your dumbbells and your bench press. I was like, that is me to a T. I never stretch.
Yeah.
And yeah, man, the pain flares up a little bit every now and then, but for the most part, it's gone like 85% of the time now.
That's good. And that's good that you found a doctor that was willing to get to the more of the root cause of it, because I listen to a lot of different podcasts, and it's amazing. We could go off on a whole nother topic of like food, but like food is related to a lot of illness as well. But if you go to get seen by a doctor, they're just going to treat it with some kind of medication. They're not going to figure out, well, what's actually causing it. So
now, is it, when you say food, and we can go off on a little bit of a food tangent here, and we'll circle back to your story in a minute. Is it just that people are eating out too much, or is it a specific types of diets that people are following that's causing? What have you been hearing in the podcasts you listen to?
The main thing is the newest thing I guess I've been is lectins and gut microbiome. So basically, you have beneficial bacteria in your gut, and there's certain foods that it's not so much the food itself, it's just like the way that the food is treated. Things that are treated with Roundup and different chemicals, or like really processed foods, just have these interactions with your gut health where it causes, thyroid issues. They were saying cause depression, like a lot of just these food allergies essentially. And it's, back when, people used to farm their own food, you'd go in and just wash it off a little bit, and you'd actually still eat some of the dirt on the food. And that, there's beneficial bacteria in soil as well. But I think it's just getting away from organic, natural foods, and just everything that food is produced on a commercial level. So I know from when I was in the marijuana business, and I used to be a grower, and just when you're taking care of lots of plants, that's your cash crop. So if something's going to eat that crop, you're going to do what you can to prevent it. And that's the best way I can think that they try and protect the crop and treat it with chemicals. And it's a lot harder to grow organic and not have issues. And you don't necessarily yield as much when you grow organic versus using chemical fertilizers and chemical pesticides.
Yeah. It's funny that we were talking about this specifically because my neighbor came over and we were had him up for a cup of coffee for 30 minutes before getting our workday started. And I was telling him that one of my goals that I sort of joke about, but am also very serious about, is getting a couple acres of land, putting a fence around the perimeter, and just adopting every single foster dog in the city and just sort of creating like a sanctuary for all these little pups. And he said, well, what if we take it one step further and we get like 30 acres of land or 40 acres of land, build a couple houses on it, get some friends in on it, and then in addition to the dogs, we can grow all of our own vegetables and we'd never have to buy vegetables anymore. We could take, maybe we'd still go out and buy our meat, or if we did need something like soy sauce or, some sort of spices, something like that, like we could go buy those things, but just grow all of our vegetables, all of like even like rosemary and cilantro and like those types of natural spices. And I said, I'm not opposed to it, man. Let's make it happen. Let's open our compound.
Yeah, you could totally do that here in Texas too. There's lots of land.
Yeah. Going back to you said that when you were growing up and sort of at the start of the partying and whatnot, you mentioned three things actually, that you felt insecure, you felt like you didn't fit in, that you were also overweight at the time. Do you think it was because you were overweight that you felt like you didn't fit in, or were there other factors as well? Just like personality or whatever the thing was?
I think a little bit of it's personality. I've never really been like outgoing, and I'm kind of the person that likes to sit back and observe instead of, hey, everyone look at me when I walk in the room. So, with the older I've got and interacting with, when I started my own business, I was forced to talk to people, like I'd meet new people every day, and that's really helped. But prior to that, I was just really shy. And a lot of times people take that as like maybe you're not like a nice person, or you're kind of a dick or something, and it's just more like just having the fear of like saying the wrong thing or like casting the wrong impression. But I've worked through that as I've gotten older, but that as a kid I was just kind of terrified to talk to new people. As soon as I like was comfortable in a group, like there was no problem. I'd open up and talk to everyone, but it was always like that, just kind of stigma of like meeting a new person, and it's just, I don't know why, but intimidated.
Yeah, I think I can relate to that very much so. Even still today, to a certain extent, definitely not with the podcast at all, but like there's a networking event coming up that I'm going to on the 24th, and I know that as it will get closer, I'll get a little bit more nervous because I'm not going to know anybody there, or I might walk in and be pleasantly surprised. Hey, there's John,
Yeah.
and I'll more than likely beeline over to that person if that does happen and start there with them as sort of an icebreaker. But yeah, I in high school, I was also very scared of saying the wrong thing. I would want to be part of the conversation, would want to be part of that circle of kids in the quad and go up and say something. I always just felt like I don't have anything to say.
Sure.
I'll listen and have a great time, but I don't really have anything to contribute.
Yeah.
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 And that's also funny that you mentioned that, because look at you now. Now you're asking people if you can be on a podcast.
I know I'm putting myself out there, but it's helped. It's helped build my confidence more. And I kind of viewing this whole thing a different way now. It's like I'm trying to put myself out there in hopes to I can actually help somebody that may be similar to me, or just is going through something that I've gone through. Because when I first started, experiencing, these issues and with drug addiction, and there was so much shame and guilt that, came with it. So I think a lot of people, they keep it a secret, and even after the fact, I just didn't really want people to know that my experience. But now with just, fentanyl addiction is just rampant in this country, and a lot of people are dying. A lot more people are dying even than the Oxycontin epidemic. I was listening to a different podcast. I can't remember what it was just yesterday, and they said that fentanyl addiction has surpassed car accidents in this country.
Wow.
So it's like the number one cause of accidental death now,
Wow.
which is insane. So, and I have people I went to high school with that are my age and older that have died, fairly recently, accidentally. They thought they were doing cocaine and it was laced with fentanyl, and they never woke up. So, so that's the idea, is, to hopefully help people out. That, I mean, it doesn't even have to be necessarily like drug addiction, but just any issues as an adult. I mean, I feel like what's cool about podcasts and the internet is, you get to hear everyday regular people talk about things that you might not necessarily get to talk with a therapist or somebody. I've done life coaching and therapy and counseling, and a lot of those people that do that as a profession just don't actually have, some of them, but most of them don't have they have the PhD or the credential, but they don't actually have the life experience. So I like to learn from people that actually have been through a similar experience. So, it's one thing to read all the books and just kind of understand scientifically, physiologically how things work, but to have lived it and, be able to advise people on what worked for me and what didn't, I think could be beneficial. And
Agreed, 100%. Yeah, I've never thought about it from that perspective, that if you're addicted to anything, whether it's drugs, alcohol, porn, food, and you go see a therapist who has never had an addiction, that no matter how many degrees they have, there's just going to be some level they might not be able to connect with you on. And that's not a knock on therapy. Therapists are awesome. They can offer you a perspective. I've said it on the show more than once, that one of my friends said, we can only see what's in front of us, but you, Jeff, can see what's above me, below me, to my left, to my right. And that was just sort of his easy way of saying that we should talk about things that stress us out, make us anxious, cause us depression, because you might be able to sit here and offer me a suggestion as to what's going on in my life that I would never have come to a conclusion to on my own. So he would say, whether it's a therapist, another addict, whoever it is, talk to someone. And maybe it starts here. You happen to hear this podcast, and one of your takeaways from whatever we talk about for the next hour is, shit, I need to start talking to somebody,
Absolutely.
And that could be a great takeaway. I'd love it if someone who had an addiction problems went and told their first person as a result of this podcast.
Absolutely.
They could tell you. You say it on your Instagram all the time. Slide into the DMs.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's helping somebody in any way, whether it's just, hey, where do I start even? There's pretty simple advice, and there's a lot of people that I met in the past before I was sober that, I was always kind of like taking their inventory and like, like kind of like gauging myself, I guess, like what's it going to be like when I actually do it? Because I saw that it had to happen, because there's limited options for addicts and alcoholics. It's, jails, death, or institutions. Mm-hmm. It's like you want to go to be incarcerated, you die, or you end up in an insane asylum. Those are like your three ultimate choices, and all three of those suck. So
yes, they do. Yes, they do. So let me take you back to that first time in rehab. Was there any particular event that caused you to want to go make that first attempt at getting sober, or was it sort of just looking at your life as a whole and thinking like, what am I doing here? What got you in that rehab center the first time?
Well, I got to a point where I was taking so much OxyContin that I knew that, for one, it was just like, I mean, the amount of milligrams that I was taking a day, I knew that like it was probably going to kill me. And then what a lot of people were doing that I knew that were addicted to OxyContin were turning to heroin. So a lot of the people that I knew that I had kind of started, that in that scene with, they no longer could afford the pills because they were going for $80 a pill at the time for an 80 milligram pill. And I was doing 8 of those a day. So that's a $640 a day habit on top of an 8 ball of cocaine, which at that time was, $200. So it's like an $840 a day drug habit I had. And I knew I was like, I don't want to turn into a heroin addict. I mean, I got to a point one time, was never into needles, but I had a guy that, I knew that was a heroin addict who, he said, I don't have any oxys, but I have some heroin. And I took a syringe of heroin and shot it under my tongue just to get that fixed because I couldn't get any oxycontins at the time, and that was kind of a wake up call. I didn't want to become a full blown heroin addict, and I know plenty of people that did and were able to like work through it and get sober, but the chances once you become an IV drug user, it's really that much harder for people to give that up. That's like a whole nother level of addiction, and I didn't want to go there. So
So help. Perhaps an ignorant question on my part, or maybe it's not. For myself and for the audience, 640. So if you were taking it correctly, let's say for your back pain, would like 80 milligrams a day be considered like quote unquote normal or appropriate? Give us some perspective on like how much is consuming 640 in 24 hours. What?
So I would say an entry level dose of, usually they won't start somebody on OxyContin. It would be like Percocet, which it's the same chemical compound. It's oxycodone. So say like your back is screwed up and you actually get a doctor that is willing to prescribe it for back pain, because they've changed the rules quite a bit. They don't do that as much anymore. I mean, it's pretty far and few between from my understanding that you can find a doctor that'll actually do it. But say you found one, they're going to probably prescribe you. They could tell you could take maybe 2 pills a day of 5 milligrams. So 1 5 milligram in the morning and 1 5, yeah, as needed. If you're good with the 1 5 milligram, then that's, just take that. But yeah, you have to work up to that dose. And I mean, I didn't do that overnight. It was over a course of time, but it just, your body kind of just keeps adjusting to it. And then like, before you know it, like 100 milligrams, this isn't doing anything.
Yeah. That's almost like I don't know if you have any thoughts on pre-workout. Obviously, it's a completely different thing from Oxy, but same thing, man. There's some dudes and probably some gals too. I have more guy friends in the gym than I do lady friends, but some of the guys in my gym are up to 600 milligrams of caffeine because at one scoop, the average scoop on most pre-workouts these days, I feel is like 180 to 220, somewhere in there. So some of these guys are taking 2.5 scoops because they say if I take one scoop, I don't feel anything, I don't get anything out of it, and yeah, man, I just these guys are younger than me too, and a thought that's gone through my head is like I really love these dudes, and I hope that this doesn't turn into some behavior worse than pre-workout. Not like 600 milligrams of caffeine is good for anyone, but 640 milligrams of I'm sorry, what were you taking?
Oxycodone.
Oxycodone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want these young men to go down that path of like
Stimulants or
right,
something.
right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's that's like when I got off of those drugs, I saw this psychologist, and she told me, even she said, you have to be careful even with coffee. She said, because I see people like you, and you trade one thing for the other. Before you know it, you're drinking 8 Starbucks a day and 4 Red Bulls, and so caffeine addiction is even a thing. I mean, it's same kind of deal. Your body just starts to get used to it, and then you just have to keep putting more and more in.
So what's the rehab process look like? Because I'm assuming would you have been one of those cases where for you to go cold turkey it could have been dangerous to your health? Did they wean you off of it, or was it a cold turkey situation?
No, I did a medical detox. So they put me on what's called Suboxone. So you basically you go on that for a short period of time just to wean you off, and it still sucks coming off the Suboxone. Like to do a cold, I did the cold turkey once on my own, and it was a nightmare for a few days. I mean, you feel like death. I mean, you're debilitated for about 2 of those days. You can't move. It's like having the flu times 100. It's pretty awful. But the medical detox, they make it a little bit easier, but still, like coming off of Suboxone, it's like then there's another thing you have to get off of. And there's people that actually have to stay on that for years after like getting off of heroin and OxyContin and things like that. So that's where the exercise came into play, was getting, when I got off Suboxone, is I got one thing people don't realize about opiate addiction is psychologically, like your brain chemistry changes quite a bit. It creates this level of happiness and mood that most people think of it as like a physical, like you just feel great, but there's a lot of that is mental. So I mean, you feel like really happy when you take those things away. You you crash pretty hard mentally. So, I mean, I was going through like a really big bout of depression after. I mean, to where it was like I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want to do anything, and I would force myself to go to the gym at 5:30 in the morning, and I would just go do like a class at the gym, like a group class, and I would just go as hard as I could, and I would feel awesome for, about 2 hours after the class, and then that depression would start to come back. And I just, I kept doing that over and over, and it just got a little bit better over time, and before I knew it, like my brain had finally healed after about 6 months.
Yeah.
It takes a while.
We'll come back to exercise in a little bit because I know that's been a big part of your. Well, I'm assuming based off the form you filled out and your Instagram, it's been a big part of your recovery, and based off what you just said. But so you go to this rehab place, and do you remember how many days, months, or years you stayed sober on that first attempt?
Yeah, so I went to the actual rehab for 30 days. I had a counselor in there who he liked me, and he said, I think if you go home after 30 days, you probably don't have a good chance of staying sober. He's like, you've been at this for a long time, and it just sounds like, your environment too may not be the best to go back to. And he said, would you consider staying for, they had like a sober living facility that the rehab owned. And I said, I'm totally broke. I had no money. I mean, I was actually able to get a scholarship for the rehab itself. I didn't, my parents aren't wealthy, and this was a place that's $1,000 a day rehab. So he said, well, if I could get you a bed here and, it's out of, like, you don't have to pay anything, would you stay? And I said, yeah, sure. So I did. I stayed 60 days additionally. So I basically, like, three months of treatment.
Okay.
And then I stayed in that community and just hung out with other sober people for, it was about a year and a half. And then I actually, I met my wife out there in the desert, and we ended up moving to San Diego. And so I stayed sober for 5 years. We got married, and I was sober for 5 years. And then decided to give drinking a try again, and I got into the marijuana business, and that kind of led just to being around people that had things that I shouldn't have seen and been around, and that's kind of where it all led back to like a full blown relapse with the hard drugs.
And quick side note, he warmed up to you.
Yeah.
Look whose side he's sleeping on. That's great. What was how did, during the first time, so before you met your wife, before you made it into rehab, how was your relationship with your family and your friends when the drugs and the drinking was at its height? Did it have an impact on your social circle or your family?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean it was I really let my family down. I was a flake, they would try and get together and I just wouldn't show up, or I would leave early. There were days I'd go just turn my phone off, disappear. But basically I just couldn't commit to anything. I was so addicted that was the number one priority. So it definitely affected all my personal relationships. I was never like a thief, or I didn't steal from people or go anything like down that road. But when you're in the middle of that, you kind of think that people don't notice, and then you find out later, like, oh, they knew all along what was going on, but it's just a hard conversation for people to have because they don't want to say the wrong thing and piss you off, but at the same time, it's like, and when you're the addict, you just think, oh, they don't even know what's going on. It's just, you think you're keeping it a big secret, so. But yeah, it affected a lot of friendships, personal relationships. I had friends reach out to me and said, they told me they had seen a change and they were worried about me. And, my family did too. But I just, I denied it every time. I would just tell them like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. Things are good.
Looking back on it, the change that your friend saw, was it just that lack of being around, that you were just more secluded? Like you said, show up late, leave early, or was there other things that they saw as well?
Well, I mean, there was other things like, when you're on opiates, like you can, like, I'm sure you've seen in like movies where people nod out or nod off, they call it, so I'd just be sitting there and having a conversation, and all of a sudden my head would be tilted back and it looked like I was asleep. And this wasn't, this would be during the middle of the day. So it wasn't like I was tired from a hard day's work. It was, my friend, one of my good friends at the time I lived with, he kind of knew what was going on, and he's like, dude, he's like, you're, like you're falling asleep and your beer's like spilling in your lap, and like, what's going on? And then, I ended up telling him what I was doing, but yeah, there that, and then, my appearance, I started to lose a lot of weight. My skin got like this kind of gray color to it. You lose like, the blood in your face is like kind of goes away, and like you have this like really like gray looking goose skin. So physically, yeah, there's a big change.
You must see a squirrel. I've never heard of the gray goose skin. I've had a few people on the show, two or three, and then I have a couple friends in AA as well who have told me about. It's called jaundice, right? When your skin starts to turn yellow.
Yeah.
So I've heard of that, but I hadn't heard of the gray one before. Just out of my own curious nature, I might go Googling this later on tonight and freak myself out with what can happen to your skin if you take too much oxy. But all right, so fast forward then to when you relapsed. What year would that have been? Do you know?
So that was in 2014.
Okay. So 2014 to 2017, what were sort of those 3 years like for you?
So it started off, I was drinking and smoking weed. And, I thought at first like, oh, this is no problem. I wasn't a heavy drinker out of the gate. It was like a couple beers here on the weekend, and then I'd smoke a little bit of weed. But then I'd started this marijuana delivery service, because this is around the time when they had kind of legalized cannabis in California, and I knew a lot of people that were growers and pretty connected in that industry. So to make extra money, I had my door business at the time, but I just wanted to make some extra money, and I started just meeting new people and kind of wholesaling, buying and selling weed, and I knew a guy that had a business selling kratom, which is that legal stuff you see at gas stations here. And that stuff actually has, if you take a large amount of it, has like an opiate effect. If you just do a little bit of it, it's more of like a caffeine, like a stimulant effect. But if you actually ingest a larger amount, it takes on a different high, which is kind of interesting. And it was legal. And he's like, oh yeah, this stuff, it's kind of like taking Vicodins, and there's no side effects like opiates. So that was like the first thing, I said, okay, well, it's natural. And, so I started taking that stuff. And then before I knew it, like a guy that worked at that place that sold that stuff also sold cocaine. And one time I had gone over there and I'd been drinking, and he offered, he's like, hey, I got some blow if you want to do something. And I did. And then before I knew it, it was like, once I crossed that line, it's kind of like, then I was like, well, I did it once. So it just, I started thinking about it more and more and more. And that's
Yeah.
like where the addiction cycle kicks in.
And then, so fast forward to September of 2017. What did life sort of? Hey, it's just the neighbor, buddy. What did life look at leading up to that? Up to September 20th.
So it just, like it was, like you said, kind of progressive. It wasn't horrible at first, but as soon as the pills, because the kratom no longer was working, and I was kind of experiencing like the opiate like effects from taking kratom, so I decided to start. I was able to get some pills, and I started with just the Percocets, kind of like the time before. It was, you start small and then you work up to the big stuff. And before I know it, I had a boat of fentanyl pills, which a boat's 10,000 pills. What I didn't realize, I didn't really know this at the time, but the outlawing Oxycontin, I should say not outlawing, but making it harder to get, created this black market of these fentanyl counterfeit pills. So the pills that I bought a boat of, which were 10,000, were actually looked like the Oxycontin pills that I used to do. Like it's a counterfeit pill. So I didn't know it at the time. I had bought a handful of them from this guy, and I thought they were actually real oxycodone pills. And then he told me, oh, if you want to buy a lot of them, I can get you this deal. And then I realized, after talking to some people, those are actually fentanyl pills. And so, I had a massive amount of them at my disposal. And it just progressively got worse and worse each day. And the only difference between this time and the time before is when I was addicted to just cocaine and pills, and I wasn't drinking. I'd cut out alcohol, but this time I was drinking on top of the cocaine and the alcohol, which creates a whole different effect.
I was I was just gonna ask, is that not like there's a good way to consume drugs, but does including that extra layer, does it make it even worse combining all those substances together?
Yeah, it makes it a lot more dangerous too.
Is that because alcohol lowers your immune system, and so or what makes it more dangerous?
Well, I should say drinking and pills together are more of a lethal combo than just pills by themselves. It slows your heart rate down a lot. So, a lot of like the older musicians that died, like Jimi Hendrix, those are just like a pill and alcohol combo. You can like throw up in your sleep and drown in your own vomit. It's the cocaine actually has like a counter effect where it's a stimulant, so it kind of keeps your heart moving along. So it's, you're playing with fire because you have three things that are kind of doing different, they all have different outcomes, right? And so you start putting them together, you get this weird synergistic effect that like, if you do a little too much of one or the other, like if I did too much fentanyl and I started nodding off, I would just do a little bit more cocaine to bring me back up. So it was like this constant, like finding that right, dosage of where could I be functional throughout the day and not, falling asleep.
Yeah. So on September 20, that's the date, right? September 20th, 2017?
Yes, sir.
That's my mom's birthday.
Oh, nice.
Different year, obviously, but yeah, September 20th. What did that day look like? Do you remember? In terms of like, yeah, what'd what'd you do? What was your mindset? What was going on?
So the day prior to that was actually when kind of everything like blew up. So I had been, I hadn't been sleeping for a while, and I started experiencing psychosis, meaning like I thought there were people outside that weren't there.
Oh no.
I thought that my wife like had some like affair going on with like one of her friend's husbands, which was totally untrue. There was like no even reason to think that. It was just all this really like negative thinking on top of the lack of sleep that, I just fabricated these stories in my head that I started to convince myself that they were true. And I went to wake my wife up at, it was like 5:30 in the morning. And this wasn't the first time I'd done this. I'd done this a couple times, and she thought that I was like having like a mental breakdown. She didn't know what was going on. She didn't realize that I was doing the drugs, and she knew that I was drinking a lot because I did that openly in front of her. So she got scared, and, she called for an ambulance because she thought there was just like, I was basically just, having some kind of episode. And, before I know it, there's cops out front, and, the sun's starting to come up, and it's, there's, 4 police officers out front. She's outside talking to him, holding my daughter, and they asked me to come out, and I just started rambling about, just saying that, just all kinds of crazy shit about, I don't even remember exactly what I said, but I was saying some things to them that, I think they knew that like something was up. And I told them, they said, we'd like to come inside. I said, no, you can't. They said, well, would you come outside? I said, no. And, there was a police officer that kept kind of inching towards the door. I had the door cracked and I was talking to them. And when he got close enough, he kind of like lunged towards the door, or his foot did, and I slammed it because it was like he wanted to like keep the door open to talk to me. I don't think he was going to try and come inside, but I was, trying to shut the door, and he kind of did one of these numbers and stuck his foot out. So when I slammed the door on him, my hand went through the glass, and it cut my hand. I had 8 stitches in my hand. And my son was still inside, and it turned into this weird like standoff kind of deal. And I told them, I said, look, I'm not keeping anybody hostage here or anything like that. It just like, in my mind, it escalated to that, even though like that was probably just more of my paranoia. But I was on the phone with the head police officer out there, and he said, well, will you let your son out? And I said, yeah, I'm not holding anyone hostage here. I said, I just was having a disagreement with my wife, and next thing I know that, everyone, you guys are all here, and it's like, I think this is just getting out of hand. And so anyhow, I woke my son up, and I let him go outside, and he walked off to my wife, and my wife was able to convince the police officers to let my dad come pick me up. So part of the deal was like everyone was going to leave, and then my dad was going to come pick me up and just like take me away. And I'm lucky because I mean I had pounds of weed in the garage. I had firearms in the house. I mean I had they didn't have to do that. I mean they could have come in, and they had plenty of probable cause to come in. And if they would have, that would have been a lot different because I also had there's cocaine and all kinds of other drugs in the house that I had forgot about. There was stuff I stashed that my wife found later. So that would have been I would have been looking at multiple felonies, which would have been my life would look a lot different. That's why I really do truly feel blessed that things went the way they were supposed to, even though it was a traumatic event. I terrorized my wife and put my kids through some things that kids shouldn't have to go through. I mean, luckily they were young enough to where they don't think they really remember. My daughter doesn't remember any of it, but my son might have little tidbits and memories of it.
Yeah. Pounds of weed.
Yeah.
Pounds of
Well, I
weed.
was still, in that, in the.
Oh, you had the business.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
The fact though that you had the boat of pills, I had no idea that it equated 10,000. Holy cow!
Yeah.
How much was that? Do you remember?
Like cost wise?
Yeah.
I think they're around like $1.50 a pill, something like that.
Okay, so you paid like $15,000 for that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I always had a lot of money in the house. I always had at least $10,000 in my safe, sometimes more. I mean, at one point I had like 140,000 in cash in my safe. And California is not really keen on people that are in the marijuana business owning firearms. That was the first thing my attorney said when I got into that industry. He's like, "Do you own any guns?" And I said, "I do." And he said, "Well, you got to get rid of them because I guess they look at it as kind of like a kingpin status, like you're some type of organized crime if you have both." So that's why it could have been really bad for if they would have come in and found all that stuff. It would have been not good for me.
Yeah. What'd that first year of recovery look like?
It was a little rocky at first with restoring relationships because nobody trusts you, and that people are used to seeing you a certain way, so you really have to gain everyone's trust back, which I mean I totally get it, but at the time you're kind of like hey, look, I'm sober now, but they don't really care because they don't forget as quick as you'd think. It's kind of like you have to earn everyone's trust back. I had to prove to everyone that that I was for real, and it wasn't just because it's not uncommon for people to relapse. I mean, it's actually statistically higher that people don't really get sober and stay sober for a significant amount of time. But I really wanted to. I mean, I hated what I was doing. I hated who I'd become. It just it's awful to wake up and just basically be a slave to that addiction, and just and on top of it, just carrying that guilt and shame and having children. It just was a total letdown to them and letdown to my wife and my family, and so I just had to power through it, and here I am 6 years later, and I have an incredible life.
Yeah. Do you still carry that same level of guilt and shame with you today that you had in that first year?
No, I've been able to work through that and let it go.
And I figured that was the answer, but for the sake of the audience, so what did that look like? What's some sort of things that you've discovered about yourself, and how has your mind shifted to where you've been able to release some of that guilt and shame? Because I know I've done some stupid stuff, and so sometimes the day after, the month after, it just sits with you, and there's that phrase that time heals all wounds, but I don't think that's necessarily true. Maybe in some instances, but I feel like you need to take some action around your the maybe not great decisions that you've made in the past. So what did that look like for you? Sort of how did you restore your relationships, and how did you sort of release some of that guilt and shame that you used to carry?
Yeah, so I had to start with, for one, like just being completely honest with myself. And they say in treatment you need to learn to love yourself, and that's not like love how you look like when you look in the mirror necessarily. It's like you need to have self-respect. And to do that, I had to start being honest with myself more, because there's a level of deception that comes with addiction. And for me it was always like, well, I'm not as bad as like so-and-so. I always knew, comparing myself to somebody I knew that was way worse. Like, well, that guy's homeless and I'm not homeless.
Yeah.
So, So, that kind of thinking had to stop. It was, you know, I had to basically like set a goal, like what do I want my life to look like? What's it going to look like in 3 years, 5 years? Like I had to start setting goals. And I also had to, like I said, just start being really honest with myself and just, cut out the bullshit because I just, when you're in that addiction cycle, I mean, you start lying and I mean, not only to other people, but you lie to yourself. So that's a big part of it. Was just getting honest, setting goals, and trying to start seeing things from not such a selfish perspective because, drug addicts are extremely selfish, and self-absorbed. So you have to unlearn that behavior. You have to start thinking about other people and not just yourself. And just when you take the drugs away, that doesn't necessarily stop. Like, I mean, that's like the main problem, but learning how to live without the drugs is, it's kind of a transition itself. Just, you basically have to just reprogram your brain to start thinking differently.
So I had a question for you and I forgot what it is because I was trying to listen. Let me think for a second. You were talking about the reprogramming and being honest with yourself. Oh, I like what you said about that was an interesting perspective of how you convince yourself that your problem isn't that big of a deal because I'm not homeless. Or you'll find someone that's in a worse case than you and then sort of justify your actions that way. That was a really interesting train of thought. Is that have you met a lot of other addicts who are recovered at this point?
Yeah,
Is that a pretty common line of thinking? Have you heard some other people say that?
I have. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when I went to treatment, I was blown away at like the different kinds of people I'd meet. I mean, I met an anesthesiologist, a heart surgeon, a guy that had been a CEO at JP Morgan. I mean, and then people that were like, lived in the streets, so it's like, and I noticed like the people, like the guys with like a better, you know, the guys with like the real high up careers, and not that I had a high up career or anything, but they actually shared that same thinking because they thought, I've got money, I've got a place to live, and that can actually be more dangerous for someone like that because the money's like no issue. They can buy as much as they want. But their perspective too is like, well, I'm not eating out of a dumpster, and I'm not sleeping under a freeway. So how bad can it really be? And that's just that, just lack of accountability, and you're just lying to yourself. It's just you're justifying it by saying, well, my situation's not that bad. And that's kind of what's scary about it is that self deception, because that thinking just, I mean, everyone else can see it from an outside perspective, like, you're gonna kill yourself, but you're just thinking of ways, how can I keep doing this, and because the thought of quitting is actually kind of scary.
Why so?
Just because it's like back to reality and having to deal with real everyday life. When you're getting loaded all the time, you kind of just live in this pseudo reality of, this world that you create. You just don't really have to think and feel things. So any like little stressful problem to an addict is like a big deal. As to like a normal person, it's like, that's no big deal. But like when you're in that world, it's like the thought of like, well, how would I deal with that without drugs? It's kind of like people that are alcoholic. Their biggest fear is like, well, how am I going to ever go to a party again and not drink? Like how am I going to interact with people and not be loose and be able to go out and dance at a wedding or something? That's, with addicts, it's just different scenarios, but kind of the same thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, there's two of my friends. They've both been on the show. They're right now. They will go out together to like either bars or clubs or even just events in general. Like you said, weddings. There's a networking event we went to the other night. There's been a few things, but for them, they like that they're both in this phase of life where they're trying to do these things sober and build that confidence of, we can find dates and we can go to these things and we don't have to be obliterated drunk by the time we leave to have a good time. But it's been cool to see how they've been developing. They're a little bit younger than you, and their sobriety journey. I think one's like 2 years in, and the other maybe is about one, give or take. But yeah, I think that's a scary notion for a lot of people. Like, oh, you want me to go ask that person out sober?
Yeah.
Ha! Like no way. Need a couple shots first, or whatever it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
If we were to ask your wife what she thinks the biggest change, or what she's observed over the last 7 years of Jeff in 2017 versus Jeff now in 2024, what do you think she would say?
Probably quite a bit, because I'm a lot of, I mean, night and day difference. I mean, I was an absolute shell of a person, meaning like, there wasn't much conversation, and you really, like, when you're on opiates, like, you just kind of lose all of your emotions, and you just become really like hollow. And that's what she used to say, is like, you just have this hollow look in your eye that you're just like nobody's there. And now, I mean, it's like we have a great relationship. We've been able to create a life that we had dreamed of, and we get along, and it's just, I mean, it's night and day difference than it was 6 years ago.
Yeah. Do you think, based off of your experience, and obviously you and me can't take an opinion and project it onto all addicts everywhere, but do you think, if someone had come, if that event hadn't happened where you had woken your wife up, and the 4 police came and whatnot, do you think there's anything that anyone could have said to you that may have got you sober again? Or do you think for you almost needed that encounter with the law to sort of shake you into the reality of where your life had got to?
Yeah, I believe that, that had to happen. That was an eye opener. I mean, I knew something was going to happen, and I'm just grateful that it wasn't an overdose.
Yeah. What's your how has your relationship changed with your kids? Do you feel like you've been parenting different, or how have you seen yourself change how you interact with them over the last 7 years?
I mean, I've always loved my kids, even when I was in the thralls of addiction. But now, I mean, I really just enjoy things that may have used to annoy me. Like I did a post the other day about just getting to take them to school, and it's like if I was getting loaded, like I would look at that like, why am I having to do this? Like what a hassle. Like I got work to do, or and now it's like I'm grateful I get to do that, because I know they're going to grow up, and I'm not going to take them to school forever. So it's just that perspective change, and just really focusing on what's important. It just makes it all that much better. Just really like enhances like just little things that to be grateful for that I'd taken for granted in the past.
Did you ever see the movie Hook?
Yeah.
I watched it about a year or two ago. It was on one of the streaming services. I don't know which one, but I didn't really watched it since I was a kid. Like I probably hadn't seen it in 10, 15, 20 years. And I thought, let's turn this on and reminisce about this childhood movie I remembered really liking. And there's this one scene where Robin Williams' wife, she takes his cell phone from him, and she says something to the effect like, we only have our kids for a moment, and in a blink of an eye, we're going to be chasing them for attention. Whereas right now they're chasing us for ours, and you're missing it by taking all these business calls. And as a kid, I don't think that line really, I never really registered it, or maybe it didn't really mean a lot to me. As a kid, I was looking forward to the sword fighting, and let's get to Neverland already. But yeah, there's just something about that line. I think maybe now as an adult, even though I don't have kids, I value all my relationships with people so much. That you never know when someone might move out of Austin, or when they might overdose. Like time is just flying by so quick that I think it's easy for us. I've done it. Take relationships for granted and not realize that. I was even thinking in my head that I have a sister in New York, a brother in Oregon. I'm here in Texas, 2 other siblings in California, and I thought the only time we were all under the same roof last year was Christmas. And so I thought, if we all only see each other once a year for the rest of our lives, we might only see each other 45 times. Yeah. And when that thought hit me, I thought, holy crap, like Christmas just became a lot more important. Like my phone's going to be miles away from me every Christmas,
Yeah.
and so yeah, man. And I hope you didn't think that I implied that you didn't love your kids. I
Oh
know,
no, not at all.
I know that you love them. I just figured that the dynamics of your relationship changed when you were on drugs and alcohol versus when you're not. And they have, like you said, that little stuff that you took for granted. Now it's, maybe the highlight of your day to be able to drive them to and from school.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it just really like getting to feel that love is the difference, you know. Like I
Yeah.
knew I loved them, of course. I would die for them. It's just the you just don't feel as much when you're, numbing yourself with alcohol and drugs. I mean, it's hard to get those little like tingly moments inside where you just, of happiness when you think about stuff like that when you're numb. And it's kind of like that with any emotion. When you numb, I mean, even looking at your cell phone is a way to kind of numb yourself out from reality, right? Like, I mean, it's a distraction. And it's just, it's I'm so grateful to be able to be their dad. And it's just, it makes me happy just actually getting to be a part of their life, because I've known some people that some fathers that have passed away, and they'll never see their kids again, and their kids will never see them. It's just puts it all into perspective.
Yeah. I know that you had a post on Instagram that, a lot of your addiction was fear driven. And I think that all of us have fears, whether we're addicts or not. We all have things we're apprehensive about, or maybe that we're afraid of. What do your fears look like these days? Is there anything that you're afraid of or concerned about?
I not so much lately.
That's good.
I just, yeah, I mean,
Season of peace.
right. I know it sounds weird, but I kind of have come, I've started reading like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius and some of the Greek philosophers, and there's a book called The Art of Living by Epictetus, and he talks about in the book that it's basically like worry about what you can control. And I've always, I mean, AA teaches you that, and a lot of the self-help programs. It's like, don't worry about things that you don't have control of. But I've just been, after consistently reading, this stuff, it's just started to click. It's like, because, I used to worry about, well, what's going to happen with the economy and my business? Like, what am I going to do? And, the difference now is it's just not, I have the faith that like I can just, instead of fold, I'll pivot. I'll make it happen. I'll figure something out. As before, it's like I was worried about things that I just can't. Were out of my control. So that little perspective change is really helped. That, and just I have a very consistent routine, which I think has really helped as well. I know it sounds weird, like to have consistent habits would kind of take that fear away, but I guess the predictability and just putting in that repetition just really helps with just drowning out that fear.
Yeah. I was at Barnes and Noble Christmas shopping in December, and my eye caught onto the Daily Stoic,
Yeah.
and I ended up picking up a copy for myself. And I will admit, I've not been good at reading it, but part of it has been because it has been out of sight, the whole out of sight, out of mind concept. So 3 days ago, I ended up just setting it right on my laptop's keyboard for my work. So before I put in my password, I'll take the 5 to 8 minutes, because it's only a 1-page read, and sometimes a half-page read. And so the last 2 days I did good. I got my reading in, but that's something I want to read through that book this year, just because I really like the author's perspective on like today's wasn't as cool, but I just like that change in perspective, seeing something through someone else's lens. And Marcus Aurelius and Seneca and the rest of the authors of that book, like they knew what they were talking about. They had some wisdom to share.
I know, and it was so long ago too. It was like almost 2,000 years ago. It's like total like relevant self-help stuff that you could read now.
Yeah.
I mean, going back to the fear though, when I was younger, I had I grew up in an environment like when I used to go to those parties and when I was in high school, and the group I hung out with were definitely like a little rough around the edges. Like there was always fights at parties, and I was never somebody that was really into violence or like didn't like confrontation, but I got in fights here and there, but not very much compared to some of my friends. And just that confrontation and like what happens if I get attacked or like jumped or So I always just had these like weird, unhealthy fears about like that, and then I also used to have these weird dreams that I'd wake up and somebody was standing at the foot of my bed, ready to attack me, and that like haunted me as a kid, and so that's kind of what like got me into getting into martial arts or like into jujitsu is like, well, if I can know how to defend myself, then I don't really have anything to worry about, you know, and that's kind of what like started that, you know, journey of like, you know, basically practicing BJJ. So
Are you still practicing?
yeah,
Still?
yeah, not as much as I'd like, but
You must be pretty good then. You've been doing this for several years.
yeah, off and on since like 2003, and I've had some injuries and taken breaks, and then you know, like with my addiction experiences, I stopped for a while. But yeah, I'm a brown belt, so the next belt up is black. So
Okay.
I'm hoping you know we'll get that in the next year or two.
Is that something you want to get? Is that a
Oh
goal
yeah,
of yours?
absolutely. Yeah, I mean that's the goal. I mean, that sport is the number one martial art that people quit, just because it's you know you sustain a lot of injuries. And there's a lot of mental block because right when you think you're getting good at it, and you know somebody will just like do something where you're like, oh man, I thought I learned stuff and I still suck. You know, it's like it's definitely like a way to tame your ego because I've seen guys go in there that you can tell like are pretty big, strong guys that you know think they're tough, and then you know 130-pound girl will put them in a chokehold or an arm lock or something, and then they get all pissed off and storm out of there, and you never see them again.
Ooh, there's some ego right there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it'll you know give you some humility real quick.
Yeah. Is that, yeah, I didn't know that was one of the more turned over sports, but I guess it makes sense.
Well, like karate, you can get a black belt. I think 3 years. Brazilian jiu-jitsu is like 10 years, and that's if you're training consistently. So, I mean, it takes some people 15, 20 years to get their black belt. If it, like someone like me who doesn't stay consistent with it, you know, between work and moving and just a lot of life stuff, I've had to take breaks, which, you know, I wish I hadn't, but it is what it is. So I never quit. And that's
Yeah.
you know, I always say take breaks. Like, you know, when people have told me, and like other guys I train with, and they're like thinking about quitting, and I just say, you know what, take a break. Like, you know, because you'll think about it, and if you quit something, it just doesn't feel good if you actually are passionate about it. And I've always been passionate about it because I'm not good at it. Like, it doesn't come natural to me, but that gives me the drive to want to keep training.
I have a buddy who's about to have his first baby any day now, and we go to the gym at the same time, so we see each other several days a week, and I'm very excited. I'm happy for him and his wife and that they have a little one on the way. I do hope that he stays in the gym, even if that changes. You know, maybe instead of going for an hour and 15, he can only go for 45, or maybe he takes the first couple months off for the sake of getting, you know, not bringing home something that he catches and then giving it to the baby on accident. So if he disappears for a little bit, I'll more than understand, but I hope for his own health and his sanity, and even for his family's sake, that he does stay consistent and get back in at some point. Because I don't know how parents do it, man. Running a business, raising kids, going to the gym, like that's a busy life.
Keeps you on your toes, that's for sure.
Yeah. When did you decide to open your own business? How did that come about?
So that came about like right after I went to treatment the first time. I had a friend who, you know, I was working with at the time, and it didn't really end up, like we were kind of talk about a potential like partnership or me like kind of being a part of the business, like bigger than just being an employee, like kind of like a partial owner. And that didn't really work out. So I just gotten married, and I was like, I have to make more money. I don't, you know, I can't stay just as an employee at this company. So I took a, you know, leap of faith, and I just decided to do it for myself. And that was before we had kids. So it wasn't, it was scary because you just never know. Like I'd never, you know, my parents owned several businesses growing up. So they were always self-employed. So I think that kind of set the tone. But yeah, I remember just thinking, having the idea, and then I just decided to do it, and it worked out. So
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And is it pretty profitable enough that you guys are comfortable? And is it your main source of income right now, or do you have anything on the side going on?
So I have 3 companies. I have one in San Diego, I have one in here in Austin, and one in San Antonio, and they're all the same. It's just like sliding door repair, and then we install glass like in windows and showers and stuff. So
Cool.
the sliding door repair thing is really what I advertise the most. It's kind of a niche business. Like there's tons of companies that will come try and sell you a new door, which it's $6,000-7,000, and you can fix
That
them.
door is?
If you were to call like Pella or Anderson or one of the ones that you see like in the advertisements all the time, like 6-7 grand for
Wow, I
that.
had no idea.
Yeah,
It's an
and you can
expensive door.
repair it for $400 or $500.
So is that sort of your pitch? Just repair this thing instead of...
Well, I mean, people usually find us that way because they, like a lot of the big companies, they advertise on Google and they'll put in their keyword search that it's repair. So like it'll say sliding door repair, and then that company will come up, and the people will call and say, "Oh yeah, I want to get this door repair," and they don't say, "Well, we don't do repairs." They just send a sales guy out. The sales guy comes out and goes, "Yeah, you can't repair this. You just need a new one." So it's people get duped all the time, and they spend money they don't really need to. So.
That's a big dupe.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's a $6,000 scheme, right? Or not a scheme. I shouldn't insult anyone, but it seems a little shady.
It is. I mean, I had an apartment owner in Austin who said, before I met you, he said we bought 10 different doors for units, and he had spent $4,500 a door. So that's 45 grand he spent, and we were able to fix them, I think, for $400. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is a pretty cool business. You think you might open up any other sites or locations down the road?
I thought about Dallas, but it's just a little far. I'm still pretty hands-on in these companies here in Texas. In San Diego, like, had the same people that worked for me there a long time, so that's worked out well.
Yeah.
But yeah, Dallas is, it's 3.5 hours away, so if I could find the right people, I'd be open to it because it's a big city, and you have to like have a pretty good size clientele to keep employees going. And that takes a while to build up. That's one thing with a business people don't realize is those first couple of years, there's, it's growing pains. I mean, you can advertise on Google and have your Yelp page and your website and all those things, but it just takes time and consistency, and then just building like some organic clientele, like property managers and people like that.
Yeah. So. Yeah. That's cool. Well, congratulations on the business.
Thank you.
I hope that as your goals change for it, if they change, when they change, you continue to be successful. That's wonderful. I've thought about that in terms of this podcast, and if it one day got to a place, not if, when it gets to a place it starts making money, I think the first thing I'm probably going to do is hire some help with the post-production, hire like a social media manager to take that off my plate, because that really doesn't bring me any joy. I post once a day for the sake of growing the podcast. I know if you want something to grow, like you were saying, you have to get the word out there somehow, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what I do it because I really want people to listen and to tune into episodes like yours and find some hope from them, get a few laughs in with us, things of that nature. But I find zero joy in it. So if someone could take that off my hands, that'd be cool. But I have thought about, crazy if it was making as much money as I get from my salary at my job, and I was actually able to tell my boss one day, hey, I'm quitting, and I was working for my own. That was not why I started this podcast, but working for myself does seem like a pretty cool notion.
Yeah.
Have you been enjoying that aspect of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's you feel so much more free being your own boss. I mean, it comes with a lot of stress that, there's pluses and negatives to working for yourself versus working for somebody. When you work for somebody, most jobs you can kind of turn it off on the weekend, unless you're some really high level, CEO or, maybe a sales guy that is constantly connected with customers. But, being able to, when I worked for other people, I could just go home on the weekend and I didn't think about work until it came around again on Monday morning. And being a business owner, I mean, it's 24/7, and, there's always like weird little problems you have to work through. And it just, if you're passionate about what you do, I mean, not to say like I didn't go into fixing sliding glass doors as like, that wasn't the thing that if you had asked me when I was younger that I wanted to do, but I like working with people, and, it saves people money, and the outcome is, people are just happy to have something that, it's not, they didn't waste an old product and throw it out and replace it with a new one. Cause even the new ones you have to fix eventually. So, but yeah, I'd recommend, people ask me, I want to be an entrepreneur. I'd say, give it a shot. I mean, cause you can always go back to working for someone else. But being your own boss is not for everyone, but I think it just kind of depends on what you want to do.
Yeah. Yeah. No, someone else brought up that similar perspective of the pluses and minuses to both that with my current job, they take care of my health insurance, my dental, my vision. I have a 401k through them. And of course I could self-fund a 401k if I was to go off on my own, but he's just like it does take, check off a lot of boxes of things that you don't have to worry about. And I do appreciate my employer. They treat me well, and it's a pretty independent job, so it's good. But in terms of fentanyl and addiction and opiates and whatnot, was there anything else that you wanted to touch on that maybe is not specific to your story, but I think there's just a sentence that you put either on your form or maybe when we were on the phone, and just some perspective that you wanted to bring to the table today, or did we sort of cover all that already?
Yeah, I mean, I think we covered most of it. That's the thing with addiction, is it doesn't necessarily have to be those chemicals. I mean, people are addicted, I mean, to all kinds of things. Yeah. So that's where my newest venture, I'm trying to bring awareness of things like cell phones and other things that you can get addicted to. Netflix. I did a post about Netflix. I had a customer here in Austin who works for Netflix, and he told me he wouldn't even allow his own kids to watch it unless they were supervised, because Netflix is kind of like, same with Facebook. I've had Facebook clients here that their kids go to Montessori schools and they won't allow them to look at Facebook, and all that stuff is designed to keep you engaged. And, it kind of triggers that same dopamine response, which is a chemical in your brain that says, oh, it makes me feel good and happy. So, it's like when you take electronics away from really young kids, you see, like, you take an iPad away from a 2-year-old, they freak out. Yeah. It's like, what are you doing? I was into that. So as far as addiction goes, yeah, I mean, just seeing now from somebody who's been addicted to multiple things and not just drugs. I mean, I'm just trying to be self-aware and, like, maybe let other people know, because all those little habits can also lead to that negative thinking, right? Yeah. So it's just a lack of perspective.
What are you most excited for now that you've had this 7 years ish of sobriety under your belt and things are looking pretty good? What are you most excited for in your future?
Just continuing to grow, to better myself, provide a better life for my family. We want to travel. That's one goal we had with moving to Austin, is it's kind of in the middle of the country, so opens up more opportunities to travel, not only within the United States, but, to other countries.
Yeah. So. One thing you had mentioned is, and we sort of touched on this a little bit, and if we covered what you wanted to say already, we can just cut this out. But one of the lines you put on your form is fitness and its ability to cure addictions.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that.
So, I mean, I honestly believe that, when you go to treatment, they'll recommend exercise, but I feel that fitness can take place of drugs in most cases. I mean, like anxiety, for instance, there's situational anxiety and then there's clinical anxiety. Clinical anxiety, I mean, maybe not the case. Somebody that's got like a really deep psychological issue, exercise might not do it for them. But somebody that's just has poor habits, that's created this anxiety, like kind of overemphasizing on things that don't really matter, going back to that fear of, like, worrying about something that's just out of your control, right? Or you watch the news and you feel a certain way. All that stuff starts to compound, and that's what creates that situational anxiety. And that's where exercise, if you start to cut those things out and replace it with some type of fitness, whether it's weightlifting or, just anything, even getting outside and walking for 20 minutes a day. I mean, it doesn't have to be like you have to go to CrossFit or do something super hardcore. I just give that a shot before you decide that you want to take Xanax or some type of anti-anxiety drug.
I was listening to a podcast on happiness the other day, and one of the things that the author was talking about was that I will not be able to articulate what he said in scientific terms, just what the takeaway is, but that when you go to the gym, there's something going on in your brain where it actually reduces the amount of depression you have and anxiety and stress and all that those items. And so if we know that we have a way to reduce those items, that then allows different emotions such as joy, contentment, satisfaction, happiness to then enter your brain and replace that space that you just feel freed up. And that's why people often feel so much better after a good workout, is because it's not just what you physically did to your body, but it's what you mentally do as well. And for anyone that's listening that's done any kind of exercise on a regular basis, whether it's cardio, Zumba, yoga, CrossFit, weightlifting, like whatever the form of exercise is, you're getting that same reaction in your brain. And I think that's why so many of us get addicted to our workout regimes, is because we feel so much better afterwards, that then when there's a day like today where I probably won't make the gym, I have too much going on today. And fortunately, because I'm not going because I'm busy, I don't notice as much. But there have been days in the past where I wake up in the morning and I have the time to go to the gym, but my whole body's just wrecked. I'm like, my quads are still sore. I can still feel my chest is sore. My back is sore. I really just shouldn't go to the gym today, and I should give my body a day of rest. And then I start thinking like, well, what am I going to do with myself now? I have these 90 minutes to do. And it's just it's an interesting thing. Maybe it's something I need to evaluate in 2024, is my inability to take rest days, and what I should do is a substitute when those days come. But yeah, fitness and exercise is a powerful thing that like you were saying, if it's something that you haven't given it a chance before, start small. You don't need to go balls to the wall and go start working out for 2 hours every day. In fact, if you do that, you might fail because you went too far with it. But maybe thinking about checking out a gym membership, a yoga class, whatever, or even just a walk. Getting off the couch and going for a walk, if you have the ability to do so, could be a really good kindness that you can show yourself.
Absolutely. Even something as simple as doing chores around the house. One thing they tell you in rehab every day, it's actually a rule, is you have to make your bed. And there's a lot of people that really bitched and complained about that. Like, why do I have to do that? I'm paying all this money. Like, they thought it was like they're staying at a hotel and somebody else should do it. But it's more about the discipline of it and taking action and doing something that you don't want to do. Same thing with, in the sober living house I lived in, it was like the dishes always had to be done. They didn't want, dishes piling up in the sink. It was a pretty firm rule that everyone had to adhere to. So there's what I'm trying to do now, and this is a new thing I'm trying to implement. If I start to get bored, I know there's always some household chore that needs to be done. Go organize my office, take out the trash. I mean, last Saturday I just, my windows are dirty, and I thought about hiring a company to come in and clean them, and I said, you know what, I'm just going to go start chipping away at it and do it myself. And it's such a simplistic thing that needs to be done, and I, because my mind starts to race sometimes. If I'm just sitting there and I don't have like a task, it just, then that brings back feelings of like when I used to drink out of boredom or do something that I really shouldn't have done, or eat food that, like, what's in my pantry that is there any sweets in there or something. So it just, take action, do something that you don't necessarily want to do, and then the outcome is you actually feel good about completing the task, and then it takes away that kind of momentary not anxiety, but like a little bit of a like, oh, what do I do here? I got to fill my time with something.
I like that. Yeah, there is something, even for me, there is something not methodical, but relaxing about cleaning. I don't know if it's just the dopamine hit of getting something done, or if it's the fact that then you sort of look around your home and everything's clean. It does just feel better. I like it to be clean. But it's funny you brought up making the bed. That is something I do religiously. I maybe miss 5 times a year, if that. But yeah, it's just a habit at this point. You get up, you make your bed.
It's a good one.
You've been doing it for decades.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else, Jeff, that you specifically wanted to talk about today?
No, not specifically. I mean, I just wanted to thank you again for having me on.
Heck yeah.
I just, like I said, the main goal here is just, try and offer up anything I can with my life experience. I'm trying to create the best version of myself to be an example and to give back to people. Yeah. So that was the goal.
One of my goals is that, I have had interactions with a couple of homeless people, as we all have, and not to say that all homeless people are addicts. I probably should have framed this statement with more context, but one thing I've noticed is that they all have phones. Everybody has phones these days,
Yeah.
and so I really do hope that this for your episode specifically, it reaches someone who, or it could even be that surgeon, like what you were saying. Maybe there's a surgeon who wanders through David's Saturday Night Sit Back, it gets a push notification, hey, you should check out this podcast, and they'll scroll to Jeff's episode on sobriety. I don't know what the title of your episode is going to be yet, but they might just click play, and it could be that turning point where they start to get out of their self for a second and see like, oh shit, like I might need to start reevaluating some of my life choices. And I hope that's already happening with the episodes that are already out there. But before we end, I'm starting a new tradition in 2024 where I'm taking questions that I really like from other podcasts and asking them to my guests to end the show. For yours, I wasn't sure what I was going to ask you yet. Okay, here's what yours is going to be. What was the last thought that kept you awake at night?
Last night or just any time?
Just any time. That your last time that you were kept awake by a thought.
It's usually related to like an unruly customer.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Unruly customers they suck.
Yeah. I mean, there's some people that just you can't please, and it's not good to let them rent space in your head. But now, I'm able to deal with that better, and just I can kind of work through it. But I used to I'm a bit of a people pleaser. So if somebody wasn't happy, I would start to kind of internalize and take it personal. But now I just, I'm totally aware that just like you could go to, say, Carbone in New York, which is like one of the best Italian restaurants there, right? Mm-hmm. And 8 out of 10 people will tell you it's the best meal they've ever had. And 2 of those people will tell you probably the worst meal they've ever had. So you just can't please everybody.
It's very true. It's very true. Yeah. Well, Jeff, this has been super fun. Thank you so much for taking the time to not only reach out, but to drive out here today and to share your story. And I've really enjoyed hearing everything that we discussed. I think we're good to go.
Cool.
Right. So with that, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in this week to David Saturday Night Sit Back. I really appreciate it. One thing that I've been doing a little different is instead of asking you for reviews, which you are still more than welcome to leave if you'd like, is if you enjoyed this episode of the show, share it with one person, just any friend, colleague, family member who you think could get something out of this. I'd very much appreciate if you tell them about the podcast. And with that, stay healthy, stay happy, and we'll see you guys next Saturday night. Bye, everyone.